When the war is over and the blade is quiet, who remains? The god, the father, or just the man? This is not a story of conquest, not a tale of triumph. It is the space between heartbeats, when silence speaks louder than battle. This is the road beyond rage. Kratos Part 2, The Road Beyond Rage. Chapter 1, The Road Opens Again. The fire had died hours ago, leaving behind a breath of warmth clinging to ash and ember. A final whisper before silence claimed the world again. Smoke no longer rose, just a faint scent, charcoal and pine, mingling with the cold breath of early morning. The sky above had not yet chosen a color, lingering somewhere between steel blue and faded indigo, as if dawn were reluctant to disturb what night had left behind. The frost clung to every branch, to every blade of grass, like time itself had paused to watch them. There was no wind. Even the birds had not yet begun their songs. And in that deep, frozen stillness stood Kratos. He did not shiver. He did not speak. His breath steamed in the cold, slow and deliberate. The world felt suspended, as though any sudden movement might break something sacred. His back straightened as he rose, slow and grounded, not out of hesitation but habit, measured, deliberate, like the drawing of a bowstring that may never loose. The Leviathan axe rested on his back, not summoned but carried. It was no longer just a weapon. It had become a tether, a reminder of every choice that led him here, to this moment where leaving was more difficult than staying. Behind him stood the cabin. Aged wood, iron nails, a roof rebuilt too many times. It had seen seasons of snow and silence, of grief and laughter, of growth and reckoning. It had sheltered them both from gods and ghosts, and from the world beyond. But now its walls held memories that weighed heavier than armor. The place had changed, or perhaps it hadn't, and they were the ones who had. Time, after all, doesn't always move forward. Sometimes it deepens, like roots twisting into the soil, unseen but unrelenting. Inside, Atreus had already risen, long before the sun had dared to touch the horizon. He had packed his belongings in the dark, not because he feared waking his father. He knew that was impossible, but because silence had become his language too. There was no need for words between them, only a look, a pause, a nod. Kratos had taught him restraint, but life had taught him patience. And in return, Atreus had given him something Kratos never thought he could possess. Trust not built on fear. They stepped away from the threshold together, without ceremony or farewell. No final glances, no lingering touch on the doorframe. What needed to be said had already lived in their silence. And so they walked, their boots pressing deep into the snow, leaving twin trails that slowly vanished beneath falling flurries. The air was sharp, crisp, and filled with the kind of quiet that comes only after a storm or before one. Somewhere in the trees, something moved, but it did not matter. Not yet. The forest greeted them not as strangers, but not quite as kin, either. The trees here remembered. The bark held stories in scars and sap. Some of the trees had watched gods die beneath their branches. Others had seen a boy carry his mother's ashes to the highest peak. These woods were no longer just wilderness, they were witnesses, and Kratos could feel their memory in the way the wind did not blow, in the way the snow fell with hesitation, like even the weather was holding its breath. There was no destination, not truly, only direction, north perhaps, or west, toward the visions, toward the dream that Atreus had spoken of in hushed tones, his voice uncertain, as if naming it might change its shape. Kratos had not pressed him. The boy, no, the young man, needed to choose his own words now, to define his own quests, but still Kratos followed, not because he believed in the vision, but because he believed in his son. They had walked roads before, roads paved in rage, in grief, in blood. But this one felt different. There was no enemy waiting just beyond the next rise. No prophecy demanding blood or obedience. Just silence. Just snow. Just the long, slow pull of something ancient and unnamed. And in that space between footsteps, between breaths, Kratos wondered, not for the first time, what it meant to walk a path not in search of war, but of peace, and whether such a thing could ever truly belong to him. There was a rhythm to their movement, though no one set the pace. The snow muffled their steps, but Kratos could still hear it, that subtle cadence of two souls walking the same road, yet carrying different weights. Atreus moved with a swiftness born not of urgency but youth, his frame taller now, leaner, shaped by a quiet discipline that Kratos had not demanded but which the boy had chosen. He did not look back. He rarely did these days, and Kratos, walking just behind, found he could not decide whether that was a comfort or a sorrow. They crossed the frozen stream by the old tree, the one split by lightning seasons ago. Its trunk was blackened, its bark gone in places, and yet it still stood rooted and stubborn, as though its survival was an act of defiance. Kratos paused there for a moment longer than he meant to. His fingers brushed the jagged bark, and for a moment he imagined it was warm. There were things in this world that refused to die. He knew something about that. His reflection in the ice below was distorted, blurred by cracks and frost, and in it he saw not the god he had once been, but the father he feared he still wasn't. Ahead, Atreus had stopped. Not far, just enough to give him space, but not so much that the silence felt like distance. The boy's eyes scanned the tree-line with an attentiveness Kratos recognized. It was the gaze of one who had seen too much too young, and now watched not just for danger, but for meaning. There had been dreams, fragments of places that did not yet exist, shapes in firelight, runes that shimmered in the air and disappeared the moment one tried to understand them. Atreus had spoken of them not as prophecy, but as invitation, a beckoning, and Kratos, for all his skepticism, knew well enough the gravity of a vision that clings even after waking. The trees here were unfamiliar. They no longer walked roads marked on any map. The snow grew deeper, untouched, clean in a way that suggested no man or god had passed this way in many winters. Still, Kratos felt eyes on them, not hostile, not curious, something older, a presence that did not breathe but still occupied space. He did not speak of it. Atreus would sense it too in time. Some things were not to be named aloud. They continued, and the forest seemed to close behind them, each step sealing off what had come before. The trail narrowed, branches arching overhead like the ribs of a long-dead beast. Light broke through only in patches, illuminating small flecks of ash in the air. Not from fire, but from something more ancient. The world was not burning, but it remembered. Memory was thick here, and though Kratos had no name for this place, it felt like something between a warning and a welcome. For a time, neither of them spoke, not out of reluctance, but reverence. Words would have only broken what was already whole. But as the sun began to rise behind the trees, weak, pale, as though unsure of its role in this story, Atreus broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder," he said quietly, "what would have happened if we stayed?" Kratos did not answer right away. The question wasn't simple, and the boy, no, the man, had not asked it lightly. They had stayed before, for seasons, for healing, for grief, but time had a way of twisting stillness into stagnation. He had learned that the hard way. The past, when left untouched too long, became something that watched you from behind, like a shadow pretending to be your shape. "We do not find peace by hiding from what follows us," Kratos said at last, his voice low, steady. Atreus nodded, though he didn't look back. But sometimes I think we left something behind. Something we weren't meant to leave. Kratos felt the pull of those words. Not because he disagreed, but because he understood. There are things that bury themselves in quiet places, waiting not to be forgotten, but to be remembered when it matters most. And perhaps that was what this journey truly was. Not a quest for answers, but for memory, retrieved not from the mind, but from the path beneath their feet. The forest thinned as midday crept silently overhead, though the sun never truly pierced the cold. It simply hovered, a faded coin behind gray veils, casting no warmth, only the implication of time passing. Their path rose into a high ridge flanked by stone and wind. Moss clung to the granite like old skin, and the air smelled faintly of iron, like blood once spilled long ago and never washed away. Kratos moved ahead now, not because he meant to lead, but because the silence behind them had grown heavier. He could feel it, not in his bones, but in the space just behind his breath. The kind of silence that suggests something has already chosen its moment, and is simply waiting for you to arrive at it. The higher they climbed, the older the world began to feel. This was no longer Midgard in the way they had known it. The roots of the realm had grown strange here, gnarled, tangled in ways that felt unnatural, or too natural for comfort. Stones bore markings no mortal hand had carved. Some were half-buried, others upright like sentinels, the runes upon them worn smooth by time and wind. Atreus studied them as they passed, his fingers moving in small gestures, half-translations that never reached the tongue. These were not Aesir markings, nor Vanir, nor even the script of the Jotnar. Something else, something forgotten. "We've gone further than I thought," Atreus murmured, mostly to himself. Kratos said nothing. Distance meant little when the path was not measured in miles. What mattered was where it led, and what would be waiting at its end. The boy's words stirred something faint in him, a memory of a time before this world, before even the Norse lands. A mountain, a betrayal, a pair of blades. So many paths, all of them paved in purpose, and yet none had brought peace. He did not believe this one would either, but still he walked. They came to a clearing, ringed with stone pillars blackened by age and frost. Snow here fell in slow spirals, as if reluctant to land. The wind circled but did not enter, like it feared what rested at the center. Atreus hesitated at the edge, eyes narrowing. "There's something," he said. Kratos felt it too. Not danger exactly, but presence. Like being watched by something too old to remember what it once was. The kind of presence that doesn't blink. At the center of the clearing, half buried in snow, stood the remnants of a tree. Not a full trunk, just the curve of a root, curling upward like a frozen claw. It had been burned long ago, blackened to the core, yet still standing, twisted toward the sky as though frozen in a final cry. Around it, stones had been arranged. Not recently, not by hand. "This wasn't made by travelers," Atreus said. "No," Kratos replied. "It was left behind." They did not move closer. There was nothing to gain from touching it, and too much to lose. Some things were left in the world as warnings, not relics. The past did not sleep easily here. It stirred beneath the snow, beneath the roots, waiting for the right name, the right footstep, the right mistake. They stepped away in unspoken agreement, circling the edge of the clearing and returning to the narrow path on the far side. Beyond that, the forest grew denser again. Shadows returned, deeper now and less willing to yield. But something had shifted, not in the trees, in them, a knowing that the road ahead was no longer just theirs, that something else now walked it too, behind them or ahead of them, or beside them in a place that did not follow the same rules of direction or distance. Kratos felt the edge return to his awareness, the part of him that had once lived in constant threat, now rising like a reflex. Atreus looked over his shoulder. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Kratos paused, listened. "Nothing." "No," he said, "but it doesn't matter." And still they walked, one step at a time into the unknown, their breath slow in the cold, their silence deeper than before. The road had opened, the journey had begun, and in the quiet behind them, something listened. Chapter 2: The Whispering Tree. It began with a voice, not a shout, not a cry, but a murmur, distant and familiar. A voice that had once laughed through storms and whispered through riddles, now softened by time and travel. They had not sought him, not directly, but the path had its own memory, and memory has gravity. The woods here grew thinner, sparser, like they knew what approached and did not dare to crowd it. The snow gave way to patches of soft moss, slick rock, and the scent of water not far off. Birds returned to the branches, but they did not sing. They watched. Kratos felt it before he saw it. That quiet presence, that breath caught between lives. The tree stood alone at the edge of a cliff, roots splayed like fingers trying to hold the land together. Its bark was pale, ash-gray, smooth like old bone. But it was not the tree that held his attention. It was what hung from it. The head swayed gently in the wind, suspended by gold chain, eyelids closed, lips slightly parted. Time had not been cruel to Mimir. His features remained almost serene, though the faint shimmer of rune magic still glowed along the bindings at his neck. Faded, like the last embers of a long watch fire. There was something both solemn and ridiculous about him, as though even in slumber he was preparing a story no one asked for. Atreus stepped forward first, his hand instinctively brushing the pouch where he still kept offerings and charms. Kratos remained back, silent, heavy, his presence a question yet unspoken. "Do you think he still hears?" Atreus asked, not expecting an answer. The boy knelt before the tree, touching the moss at its roots, pressing his palm flat to the earth. A small whisper stirred, like dry leaves shifting without wind. It wasn't language, not at first, just rhythm, echo, something beneath thought, and then a low groan, as if the tree itself exhaled from a long-held breath. Mimir's eyes flickered, slowly, as though waking from centuries, not seasons. "Well," came the voice, dry, amused, a little rough around the edges. "Either I've gone mad, or you two have finally remembered I don't much care for long naps." Atreus laughed, a soft sound, surprised and warm, like something he hadn't realized he was holding in. Kratos did not smile, but something eased behind his shoulders, barely perceptible. But there. "You were dreaming," Atreus said, rising. Mimir blinked, his head tilting slightly in its chains. "Was I? Humph. Wouldn't be the first time. Some trees dream long, boy, longer than most men live. This one here." He paused, looking up at the great white bark above him. "She's not like the others. Ancient, but awake in her own way. Doesn't speak in words, but in tides, memory. And let me tell you, lads, she's uneasy." Atreus glanced at Kratos, then back at Mimir. "Uneasy about what?" "That," Mimir muttered, "is the problem. She doesn't know, just feels it, like thunder from too far off to hear, but close enough the bones twitch in warning. Something's stirring in the roots of things, and not all of it's natural. The balance, it's shifted, quietly, like someone moved a stone from the foundation, hoping no one would notice, till the walls began to lean." Kratos stepped forward now, slow and solid. "What do you know?" Mimir turned his gaze toward him, and for a moment, the jovial tone dropped. Only that paths are crossing again that were once kept far apart. Threads tangled that were meant to lie dormant. Realms have grown restless, not openly but beneath. And that, my friend, is always how it starts. First, the silence deepens. Then the echoes come. Atreus looked toward the forest they had left behind. We've seen signs. A burned root in a clearing. Stones arranged around it. Mimir winced. Aye. Not their doing, though I wager they'd like it to seem that way. No, that's older. Forgotten by most. But not all. He fell quiet then, eyes narrowing, as if listening to something beyond the tree, beyond them. The wind rose slightly, brushing through the branches overhead like fingers across harp strings. Not threatening, not yet. I think, Mimir said slowly, you've walked into something that doesn't know it's awake yet. But when it does, the waking may not be kind. The wind shifted again, not stronger but more curious, as if it too had leaned in to listen. Leaves whispered above them, though no others rustled in the grove, and the pale bark of the great tree shimmered faintly with unseen glyphs, faint and curling like dreams fading in first light. Atreus circled the base of the tree slowly, fingers brushing along one of the low-leaning roots. He looked older now, not in body but in posture. He no longer moved like a boy trying to prove himself, but like someone searching for answers he no longer expected to be easy. Kratos watched him silently, arms crossed, eyes flicking from root to branch to Mimir. His stance was still. His mind was not. You said the realms are restless, Atreus said, his voice low, cautious. Which ones? Mimir let out a long breath, the kind that seemed to travel up through the base of the tree and out through his mouth like smoke from old coals. They don't call out by name, lad. But if I had to wager, Vanaheim's gone quiet again. Too quiet. Not the peace of healing, but the kind that comes before something breaks. And Alfheim, well, the light's been flickering. Atreus looked up sharply. Flickering. Mimir nodded, grim, like a lantern in a wind that shouldn't be there. The elves won't say a thing outright, of course, being as polite and cryptic as a raven in court. But something's knocked loose. It's in their songs. Discord. Not war, not yet, but tension. You can taste it. And Helheim, well, let's just say the dead don't rest as easy as they used to. You know what it means when hell stirs. Kratos exhaled through his nose. Not a sigh exactly, but a release. He knew better than most what it meant when the dead began to turn in their sleep. He had seen it before, in other lands, in other times, and it always meant that the wall between stories was thinning. And Asgard? Atreus asked. His voice was careful, but his eyes didn't blink. Mimir hesitated only slightly, but enough that Kratos saw it. The head swayed faintly in its golden bindings, and his voice was slower when he spoke again. Hard to say. What's left of Asgard is scattered, hidden, pieces in the snow and secrets under stone. But the gods. He paused. Gods don't die the way men do. Some vanish, sure. Some fall. But others shift. They change faces. Change names, crawl into myths like foxes into old dens. You may think them gone, only to wake one night and find them whispering through another's mouth. A silence fell then, not heavy, but weighty, like a hand resting on one's shoulder just long enough to remind them it's still there. Atreus glanced at Kratos again, but the old god's face gave nothing away. Stone and frost, still and unreadable. Someone's trying to shape the realms, Mimir said finally. Not by force, not yet, but through forgetting, through erasure. They don't break the roots of the world tree. They rot them, quietly, patiently, If you hadn't come when you did, I might have slept through the worst of it. And by then, well, stories don't fight back when they're forgotten. Atreus stepped closer. Then we remember them. We find the ones that were lost. The names. The truths. Mimir smiled faintly, and for once, the smile didn't carry wit, carried sadness. A noble idea, lad, but memory's a dangerous thing. It doesn't always come clean, and sometimes the ones we bring back aren't grateful. The wind lifted once more, sharp now, cold, and somewhere far below the cliff, a deep groaning echoed like stone shifting under pressure. It wasn't loud, but it was ancient, and it didn't sound like it belonged. Kratos turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing. Not fear, not surprise, just recognition. The scent of a path old enough to be buried but not gone. He said nothing. He simply laid a hand on the hilt of the axe, not in threat, but readiness. "This road you're walking," Mimir said softly, almost like an echo from the tree itself, "it won't lead you through the realms as they were. It'll take you through what's left, through what's becoming." They stayed a while longer in that place, though none of them marked the time. Hours meant little in groves where memory outweighed motion. The wind came and went. The shadows shifted. Once, a low flutter passed through the tree above, like wings brushing bark. But no bird revealed itself. Only the faint rustle of something watching from behind the world. Mimir spoke less now. His usual humor, sharp, sardonic, had dulled, and in its place was something slower, thoughtful. Even fear, perhaps, though he would never name it. Kratos sat beside the tree, one hand resting on his knee, the other open against the earth. His eyes were fixed on nothing, but his ears were tuned to Atreus, to Mimir, to the world breathing behind the bark. He did not trust places like this, too still, too sacred. In Sparta, silence had been a weapon. In Midgard, it was often a warning. And here, beneath a tree that whispered in languages older than gods, silence was something worse. A mirror. The kind that showed you not what you were, but what you carried. Atreus paced slowly in a circle beyond the roots, tracing patterns in the moss with the tip of his bow. He wasn't restless. He was listening, too, but differently. Kratos had always listened for threat. Atreus listened for meaning. Somewhere in the middle they met. Neither of them spoke of it, but they both felt it. That strange tension in the air, like a harp string drawn taut across an unseen hand. It hummed faintly behind Mimir's voice, behind the breeze, beneath the very ground. Not loud, not constant, but there. "The tree doesn't show visions anymore," Atreus finally said. "Not like before." Mimir grunted. "Aye, she's older now, or more cautious. Trees like this, they don't dream as easily once they've seen too much. Vision turns to memory, memory to burden." Atreus nodded. He understood that, more than he wanted to. Kratos stood slowly, joints stiff, motion deliberate. He looked to Mimir, and for a moment the two shared something wordless. Not agreement, not trust, just understanding etched deep like stone against time. Mimir blinked slowly, the runes around his bindings flickering faintly. "I'll stay here a while longer," Mimir said. "There's more to listen to." "She's not finished whispering." Atreus raised a brow. "You sure you'll be all right?" The head chuckled softly. "Boy, I've been hanging from worse places with less company. Just don't take too long. The world's turning under your feet whether you walk or not." Kratos turned without a word, and Atreus followed. Back into the treeline, back toward the place where paths become unclear. The snow resumed not far ahead, like a curtain pulled across memory. The world beyond the grove was colder than before, as though they'd stepped not into weather, but into consequence. They walked in silence. Even the birds held their breath. After some time, Atreus spoke. "Do you believe him?" Kratos didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the trees. His steps remained steady. "I believe the tree." Atreus looked over at him. "Why?" "Because it did not try to be heard." There was weight in those words, and the kind of simplicity that left no room for doubt. The forest ahead darkened slightly, not from clouds, but from something more abstract, expectation, perhaps. The kind of shadow cast by futures not yet born. Behind them, the whispering tree stood tall and silent, and though its branches no longer moved, and Mimir's voice had faded, the echo of their visit lingered in the roots. Something old had stirred, not awakened fully, but turned, like a sleeper adjusting in their bed, sensing that soon it would be time to rise. And far beneath them, beneath root and rock, where light had never lived, something listened back. Chapter 3: Freya in the Fog. The fog came without warning, thick and low, curling between the trees like smoke that had forgotten its fire. It didn't descend. It rose. From the ground, from the cracks in the roots, from the breath of the earth itself. One moment the forest was crisp with frost and wind, and the next it was swallowed whole in a hush so absolute it felt like standing at the edge of a forgotten temple. The world turned pale. Details vanished. Even their own footsteps lost direction. Trees became shadows. Shadows became shapes. And Kratos slowed. He did not speak, but his hand tightened on the axe. Reflex, not fear. This was no natural fog. He had walked through too many veils not to know the difference. The air was cold, but not biting. Still, but not restful. It held the weight of a presence unspoken, one that pressed not against the skin, but underneath it. He looked to Atreus, who was already glancing around, bow lowered, but ready. The boy's breathing was measured, but his eyes were alert, searching the gray. "She's here," Atreus whispered. Kratos said nothing. He didn't need to. Freya was not the kind of presence you sensed. She was the kind you remembered. The fog wasn't hiding her. It was her. She had always been bound to places like this, where light was soft and old things held their breath. She did not command the forest. She was the forest when it chose to look back. The trees around them grew dense, then distant. The world folded in on itself, not violently, but intimately, like a dream pulling the edges closer. They walked only a few paces more before a clearing emerged, not cleared by blade or storm, but grown into that shape, circular and waiting. And there, beneath a half-dead birch twisted like a blade pulled from flesh, stood Freya. She wore no armor, no crown, just layers of travel-worn cloth and something like mourning across her shoulders. Her hair was loose, windless, her face unreadable. She looked not like a queen, but like someone who had long stopped needing thrones. Her eyes, however, held the same quiet fury Kratos remembered. Not ablaze, not violent, but steady, like a flame in a sealed room, contained, but absolute. Atreus stopped, uncertain. Kratos stepped beside him, not in protection, but in presence. "I did not come to ask for forgiveness," Kratos said. "I know," Freya replied. Her voice was low, not cold, but coldness would have been easier. This was something deeper, something weathered, a voice that had run out of tears, not rage. She looked between them and said nothing more for a long moment. In that silence, the forest waited too. "You should not be here," she said at last. "We didn't come for you," Atreus offered, his tone not defensive, but honest. That seemed to sting, but not deeply. Freya let her eyes rest on the boy longer than the man. She saw things there that even he had not named. Perhaps that's what held her in place. Uncertainty, not mercy. The fog finds those the forest allows, she said quietly. It let you through, but that doesn't mean it welcomes you. We came for Mimir, Kratos said, and now you carry the scent of ash and old runes, she replied. So you've stirred it, then. I felt the tremble hours ago. In the roots, in the wind. You woke something. We didn't wake anything, Atreus said. It was already stirring. Freya tilted her head, as if considering whether to believe him, or whether it mattered. Dreams don't wake themselves, boy. They need a heartbeat, a name, a purpose. She stepped forward then, just once. Not enough to threaten, but enough to remind them that the goddess of the forest had not faded, even if the war had. Her power didn't blaze like Thor's, didn't tower like Odin's. It crept, rooted, waited. I will not stop you, she said, but I will not walk with you. Good, Kratos said. I did not ask. There was something between them then. Not a spark, not a blade, just a silence so thick it nearly spoke. And in the distance, past the fog, something groaned low, like a tree splitting in a dream, where no sound should exist. Freya turned her gaze from them and looked past the clearing, into the fog where no path could be seen. Her eyes didn't search, they listened, as though the wind carried language too old for ears. Her stillness wasn't hesitation. It was deliberation. Every movement she made seemed shaped by something unseen. Not performance, not posturing, but prophecy. Like her body remembered the rhythm of rituals even if her heart no longer followed them. For a long moment, she stood with one hand resting lightly on the twisted birch beside her, and her fingers moved along its bark in silent communion. I've heard whispers, she said at last, her voice lower than before, as if spoken half to herself. Not from the gods, not from the dead, from the things beneath them. Old songs rising again, not with melody but with need. The kind of need that doesn't ask permission. It just spreads. Atreus took a small step forward, cautious but drawn by something she wasn't saying. Do you know what's causing it? Freya didn't answer immediately. Her fingers paused on the birch, and when she turned to face them again, her expression had changed. It was wearier, sharper. There are forces we tried to forget after the fall of the Allfather. Truths that even Yggdrasil didn't want to carry anymore. Threads we thought had been cut. But the thing about roots, she trailed off, gaze falling to the earth. They grow back, and sometimes they grow wrong. Kratos said nothing. His face remained unchanged, but his mind turned slowly, steadily, like a stone will grinding old bone into dust. He had long since stopped believing in final victories. Every god slain, every enemy cast down, every past buried. None of it stayed dead. The world did not end. It circled back, and what circled now felt larger than a man or even a pantheon. Felt like a consequence. Freya looked at him, really looked. You felt it too, haven't you? Yes, Kratos said. What does it feel like to you? Kratos paused. His fingers twitched near the axe but did not touch it. It feels like silence, watching itself. Freya nodded slowly. Then we are past the beginning. Atreus swallowed. What do we do? You listen, she said. Not just to the trees, to everything. The wind, the stones, your blood. You've both spent so long fighting what speaks in riddles. Now you must learn to understand what never speaks at all. She stepped past them, close enough that they could smell the wild things in her hair, the bitter herbs worn like armor, the faint trace of something like grief underneath. Her presence was not forceful, but it filled the space around her like heat fills a cave, quiet, unseen, but undeniable. "I will not walk beside you," she repeated, "but I may walk ahead, or behind, or where needed." Atreus frowned. "That's not an answer." "It's the only kind worth giving," she replied. "If I name what's coming, you'll fight it. If I don't, you might see it." Kratos looked to the edge of the clearing. The fog hadn't lifted, but it had shifted, opening not a road, but an invitation. There was no path, no sign, just the subtle beckoning of something waiting beyond belief. He did not trust it, but neither did he turn from it. Freya stopped at the opposite edge, her back to them now. She raised a hand and touched the air. Not casting a spell, not summoning, just feeling. "It's not just the realms that are changing," she said. "It's the space between them." Atreus tilted his head. "You mean the branches of the world tree?" "No," she whispered. "I mean the places where branches never were." A moment passed, heavy as stone in the chest. Then she walked into the mist and was gone. Not vanished, not hidden, just dispersed. Kratos looked at his son. "Atreus," the boy nodded, and again they walked, not away from Freya, not toward her, but through the space she had left behind, a space that now felt less like absence and more like warning. The fog thinned, but it did not break. It drifted behind them in slow coils, reluctant to release their silhouettes back into the world. Each step forward felt like moving through breath held too long. The trees around them regained their shape, but not their warmth. Even the snow had grown quieter, muffled in a way that went beyond mere softness, as if sound itself had been asked to wait. Kratos walked with the same measured pace he always had, but his eyes moved more now. Slight shifts, scanning branches, trunks, shadows that stretched wrong. The forest was no longer simply landscape. It was witness, and perhaps accomplice. Atreus said little. His mouth stayed closed, but his thoughts spun visibly behind his brow, behind every glance. Something Freya had said had lodged inside him, not as fear, but as weight. The idea that what stirred in the world was not coming, but returning. That perhaps what lay ahead wasn't a challenge to be faced, but a consequence to be owned. And that those consequences might not belong to him alone. "Do you think she'll follow us?" he asked eventually. Kratos shook his head once. "Not in the way you mean." "Then how?" Kratos was quiet for a few steps more. "She follows everything. She's not behind us. She's beneath, around. She's watching how the road changes you." Atreus accepted that without argument. He had grown past the need to challenge every riddle. Silence was easier now, and more honest. But still, his fingers brushed the talismans at his belt, the small artifacts he carried. Some from realms now broken, others gifted, one or two found in places even he could not explain. They hummed faintly now, not loud, not bright, just aware. The fog eventually parted enough to reveal a ridge, a rise of stones scattered with frostbitten grass and brittle roots. At its peak stood a dead pine, blackened but still upright, as though defying its own failure. Kratos stopped there, hand on the trunk, and looked out across what lay below. The forest spread wide in every direction, blanketed in snow and hush. But beyond, further still, the land broke open. Rivers frozen mid-turn, canyons dusted white, hills rolling like the backs of sleeping beasts. And just barely, on the farthest edge of sight, something shimmered. Not light, not fire, something colder. A distortion in the air like heat, but reversed. The way a place might look if time had grown thin there. Kratos narrowed his eyes. It did not move. It waited. Atreus stepped beside him. "Do you see it?" Kratos nodded. "What is it?" "I don't know. that more than anything chilled the boy. There were few things left his father admitted not knowing, and fewer still that made him pause. The silence between them settled again, thicker, deeper, not empty but full, full of what Freya had not said, full of what Mimir had only hinted at, full of what the realms themselves had begun to dream in their sleep. They descended the ridge slowly, not with fear, but with reverence. For whatever lay ahead was not enemy or obstacle. It was memory, unburied, and memory had teeth. At the base of the hill, the snow grew deeper, swallowing their steps. No trail marked their passing. The forest behind them closed, and in the hush that followed, a sound rose, not loud, not sharp. A long, low hum, a single note, came from nowhere and everywhere, and then it stopped. No birds returned. No wind picked up, but something had changed. Kratos looked back once, just once, but saw only white. Atreus adjusted his grip on his bow, and together, without signal or word, they moved forward. The road was no longer opening. It was leading. Chapter 4, The Broken Runes. The stone stood half buried in the snow, leaning like it had fallen asleep while the world moved on. No marker, no path leading to it. Just silence, and the sense that silence had been listening longer than either of them had been breathing. The runes carved into its surface were wrong. Not worn, not damaged. Wrong. They twisted in on themselves, curling into broken shapes that suggested meaning, but refused to give it. It was as if the language had fractured mid-thought. Kratos crouched before it, one hand pressed to the cold stone, the other hovering near his axe, not drawn but present. Atreus stood behind him, arms crossed, the snow clinging to his sleeves in perfect stillness. He'd seen Jotnar's script before, etched into mountains, painted across sky mirrors, folded into trees. This was different. These marks weren't dead. They pulsed faintly, not with light, but with pressure, like the feeling of someone standing behind you in a dream you can't wake from. He moved closer, slowly, lips tracing silent syllables as he tried to sound out the shapes, make sense of the nonsense. "It's not just giant speech," he murmured. "It's corrupted, mixed, like something's rewriting it from the inside." Kratos said nothing. His fingers moved along one of the deeper lines, and when he touched a particular curve, what might once have been the rune for path, a faint tremor passed through the ground. Barely there, not even enough to shift the snow, but real, felt, not heard. "They're not just broken," Atreus said. "They're infected." The word hung between them like frost in still air. Kratos rose slowly, eyes narrowed. "Language is power, even when forgotten." Atreus nodded. "Especially then." He circled the stone once, careful not to step too close. Around its base, small shards of something pale and glass-like poked through the snow. Bone? No, not bone. Crystal, maybe cracked, scattered like pieces of something once whole. Some of them bore marks too fine for carving. Burned in, perhaps, or grown. "There used to be a name here," Atreus said. "I can feel it. A true name. Whose? I don't know. That's the problem. Something took the knowing out of it." Kratos frowned. This was more than desecration. This was unraveling. He'd seen temples razed, relics stolen, gods forgotten. But this was different. This was editing. A force not content to destroy, but one that sought to replace truth with vacancy. He glanced at Atreus. "The dreams, do they speak like this?" Atreus hesitated. "Not exactly, but close. Lately the runes in them blur when I try to remember, like they don't want to be remembered, like they're slipping from their own meaning." Kratos turned his gaze back to the stone. The wrongness here wasn't just visual, it was emotional. The way grief feels before you know why. The way dread rises before the danger comes. He didn't trust it, but he respected it, and that respect tasted bitter. Above them, the sky remained slate gray, thick with unmoving cloud. No wind, no snow falling now, just cold. And the kind of stillness that suggests the world itself is watching from behind the curtain, unsure whether it's ready to speak again. More stones waited ahead. He could see their shapes now, half hidden in the woods, leaning, broken, humming faintly like teeth aching in the cold. Each bore runes. Each pulsed with that same distorted potential. A sentence scattered across a landscape. A story half erased. "We need to read them," Atreus said, "before whatever's doing this finishes." Kratos gave a single nod. Not of agreement, but of grim understanding. And together they moved toward the next stone. Not knowing what name had been lost. Only that something had gone missing, and that the world was beginning to forget itself. They found the second stone in a shallow ravine where the snow grew thin and the roots of ancient trees pushed up through the earth like ribs. This one had fallen, split down the middle, with one half buried in frozen moss and the other tilted skyward like a blade. It bore more runes than the last, and though many were cracked or faded, Atreus knelt beside it immediately, eyes scanning, mouth moving silently, fingers brushing dust from grooves older than their bloodline. "It's a sentence," he said, more to himself than to Kratos, "or part of one. I think it once said something about a gate, a key, but now the structure's all wrong. The verbs collapse on themselves. The words don't hold their shape." Kratos remained standing. He didn't kneel before language, but he watched closely. He had grown used to seeing his son interact with myth like a craftsman, hands moving over ancient things with precision, reverence, control. But now, there was uncertainty in the boy's movements. Not fear exactly, but caution, as though the runes might react. And then they did. Just a flicker, a pulse. One of the carved lines, shallow, simple, flared with faint reddish light. Not fire, not magic, but presence, like something had noticed the attention. Atreus recoiled slightly. "Did you see that?" Kratos stepped closer. "Yes. It wasn't me. I didn't do anything. I just read it. You invited it." Atreus looked up, startled. Not by the accusation, but by the truth in it. There were rules in old languages. Not just phonetics, not even power, but relationship. To speak certain words was to reach out. To read them was to accept what might reach back. "I think something's rewriting the runes," Atreus said. "Not just destroying them, rebuilding them into something else. Something it understands." Kratos stared at the stone. I don't know what to call it. It doesn't feel like a person. More like a pressure. Like gravity. Intention." Atreus nodded slowly. "Yes, something intends this." For a moment they said nothing. Behind them the forest breathed. Quiet, neutral, watching. The ground felt steady, but underneath that steadiness was something unspoken, like a great weight pressing down on every inch of the realm, forcing it to stay still. Kratos turned to scan the surrounding trees. "This is Jotnar script, but this is not Jotnar work." "No," Atreus said. "This is something else using their language to send a message it doesn't want us to understand. Or maybe a message meant to be misunderstood." That possibility hung between them, heavier than cold. Mistranslation as a weapon. Misinformation as a curse. To twist language is to twist thought, to plant false memory, to corrode history, to reshape the world not by force, but by suggestion. "What kind of power does that?" Atreus whispered. Kratos' reply came low and measured. the kind that fears being named. A gust of wind passed through the ravine then, sudden and sharp, as though the world flinched. The fallen stone gave a soft hum, barely audible, like a note plucked from a broken string. Atreus pulled back. "We shouldn't stay near it long," he said. "They're listening." Kratos gave a slow nod. "Let them." But he stepped away all the same. Atreus followed, glancing once more at the broken text, at the sentence that tried to form and failed, that begged to be remembered but would punish the attempt. Something wasn't just erasing, it was replacing, not destroying history, but rewriting it mid-story. And the world was beginning to forget what it once promised. By the time they reached the third stone, the snow had stopped falling. Not melted, just absent, as if the sky had forgotten how to release it. The clouds above remained, unmoving, a canvas of gray unmarred by light or storm. The forest here was thin, sparse, more bone than breath. The trees no longer creaked. The wind had stilled, and yet the silence was louder than ever. It rang, pressed. It meant something. The stone lay broken entirely, shards scattered like teeth along the bank of a frozen stream. No piece larger than a man's hand remained intact, and yet each fragment still bore markings. Not clean runes, glitched ones, lines that forked where they shouldn't, angles stretched too far, as if the stone itself had been made to scream, and the scream had been carved into its surface. Kratos crouched, picked one up. It was cold, not with winter, but with emptiness. There was no memory in it, no weight of time, only blankness dressed as meaning. Atreus knelt across from him, picking through other shards, trying to align them. He arranged 5 pieces across the ice like puzzle work and ran a finger across their edge. "These belong to a name," he said. "I think it was a place, not a person. Something important. Something that shouldn't be gone." Kratos did not respond. He was holding one shard in particular, small, triangular. Pulsed, only faintly, but enough that he knew it still lived. A whisper touched the edge of his hearing. Not a voice, not a language. A pull, as if the shard were not an object, but a fragment of command. Not meant to be understood, only obeyed. He crushed it. The sound it made was not stone breaking. It was softer, wet, like a breath being pulled back into lungs that had forgotten how to breathe. The other shards dimmed immediately. The hum beneath them vanished. Atreus flinched. "What did you do?" "I refused it." Atreus looked uneasy, but didn't argue. Something about the moment felt too fragile to push against. He gathered the other fragments carefully and swept them back into the snow, covering them. Not to hide, to bury. "I think these stones used to carry memory," he said quietly. "But now they carry something else. Echoes of a will that doesn't belong to the realms. Something foreign. Not just ancient, wrong." Kratos nodded once. He had known many gods, many powers. Most had demanded worship. Others had cloaked themselves in symbols, rituals, control. But this was different. It did not seek to rule. It sought to overwrite, to unmake the foundations and build something unrecognizable in their place. Something that could not be questioned because it had no words, only silence. They stood together in the half-light of an unmoving sky, surrounded by broken language and the weight of things left unsaid. The stream beside them remained frozen, but beneath the ice, a shape moved. Just once. A slow, subtle drift, like something sleeping or pretending to. Neither of them looked directly at it. They left the clearing without speaking, their footsteps deep in snow that did not yield. Behind them, the wind stirred at last, but it did not howl. It whispered, a scraping sound, not unlike pen on stone, as if something else had begun to write again, just beyond hearing. Kratos looked once over his shoulder. just once, and in the shattered arrangement of runes, he thought he saw a shape. A symbol, almost familiar, but when he blinked it was gone, erased, and the silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt full of something waiting to be said. Chapter 5: Visions of Olympus. The dream began in silence. Not the kind found in forests or snowfields, but the deeper kind. The kind that lives between heartbeats, between thoughts. A silence with shape, with pressure. Kratos did not remember falling asleep. One moment he had been seated by the fire, small, low, unlit, and the next he was standing in marble corridors too white to be real, too clean to be true. They stretched without shadow, gleaming like memory polished too many times. He did not speak. Dreams do not answer questions. They echo them. The floor beneath his feet was warm stone, not cold like Midgard, not soft like moss. This was crafted ground, made by hands that worshiped structure more than purpose. Tall pillars reached above him, impossibly high, too tall for gravity, too proud for time, and everywhere. Etched into the walls, carved into the floor, inlaid with gold leaf that had not dulled, symbols. Not runes, not Jotner script, Greek, Old Greek, ancient, familiar, and all of them carried his name, not directly, not spoken aloud, but implied. One was a blade, one was a chain, one was a hand grasping a mountain, one was a child swallowed by a father. All metaphors, all masks, but Kratos had worn each of them. He walked, not because the dream asked him to, but because he refused to stand still in places like this. The past does not get to hold him. He holds it. That is the deal. That is the discipline. But even so, the walls pulsed slightly as he moved, as if his very steps stirred the dream into remembering itself. And then the voice came, soft, wounded, too calm to be kind. You still carry it. He turned. There was no figure at first, just light, gold and red, like fire behind a veil. Then slowly a shape resolved. Not fully a man, not fully a god, something between. The voice again, quieter this time. The rage. You buried it, but you did not release it. Kratos said nothing. His breath was steady, his hands open. He would not draw a weapon here. Not in a place made of his own guilt. You burned the past, the voice continued, but the ash settled inside you. Now the shape took fuller form. A face, not Zeus, not Ares, not Deimos, not even himself. It was a consequence, the embodiment of what followed him, what he left behind when he tore gods from their thrones. His body shimmered like oil on water. It had no eyes, but it watched him. You made peace with your son, it said, but not with yourself. Kratos stepped forward, slowly. You are not real. I am remembered, it said, and that is enough. The dream shuddered around him, just slightly, a flicker of images along the walls. Athens burning, chains pulling, blood spattering stone. Not to accuse, to remind. Kratos breathed in through his nose, slow, grounded. You have no name, he said, because you never gave me one. He took one more step. The shape recoiled slightly, but not in fear, in acknowledgement, the way shadows shift when light grows firm. You do not belong in this realm, Kratos said. Stay out of my path. I do not enter paths, it whispered. I haunt them. And then, just like that, the corridors crumbled. Not shattered. Collapsed inward, like paper burned from the inside. And Kratos was back. Back in Midgard. Back at the fire. Atreus asleep a few feet away, curled in his cloak. The snow had returned. The world was quiet. But inside his chest, something ticked. A rhythm, not rage, Not grief, something older. The fire had burned low in the hours since. Or perhaps it had never been lit at all. Kratos could not recall. Dreams have a way of blurring the edges, even for a mind disciplined like his. He sat there now, unmoving, staring into the coals that gave no heat, listening to the rhythm in his chest. Not his heartbeat, but something beneath it. A drumbeat without a source. A summons with no language. It did not urge him forward. Simply echoed, as if something inside him had been tapped like stone, and was now slowly ringing out across the walls of his soul. Atreus stirred nearby, but not with the slow movement of waking. It was that twitch of muscle, the uneven breath of his own dreaming. His brow furrowed, fingers clenched. A word left his lips soft, unclear. Mother! Kratos looked over, but did not move to wake him. The boy, no, the young man, had earned his own battles even in sleep. Yet he watched with a father's stillness, that readiness born not of fear, but of knowledge. That even dreams can hurt if they touch the right place too deeply. And tonight something was touching. The sky above was starless. Not cloudy, simply bare. A ceiling of night stretched smooth and absolute, as though even the stars had blinked themselves out to avoid watching what might come next. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, but not Fenrir. Smaller, wilder, alone. Kratos returned his gaze to the fire. In his mind's eye, the dream had not ended. The corridors remained, just behind the eyes. The voice, too. Not its words, but the feeling of being seen by something he never named. Something that had never died. Not fully. Not in Greece. Not in time. And now it was bleeding through the cracks of realms like water through stone. He thought of Olympus, not with longing nor with fear, but with fatigue. The weight of what he had done was not carried in his arms, but in his absence, in what he no longer said, in what he no longer allowed himself to remember. He had once believed the destruction of a pantheon was the end of a story, but stories do not end where blood stops. They end where memory releases, and that had never happened. His fists closed slowly, not in anger, in knowing. He had thought Ragnarok would be the reckoning, but this felt older, more patient, a reckoning not of battle but of accounting, of being tallied, not tested. A sound stirred beside him. Atreus, sitting up, eyes half-lidded, face pale, voice low. I saw a mountain, he said. Kratos turned his head, said nothing. It wasn't here. It wasn't Jotunheim. It was higher, too clean, too bright, and something was burning at the top. A tree, I think, but wrong. Kratos was quiet for a long moment. Then, was I there? Atreus hesitated. No. Another silence. Then, but I think something was looking for you. Kratos stared into the fire again, and somewhere, in the base of his skull, the whisper returned. Not words, not command, just a presence, the knowing that you've been found. The next morning arrived without sunrise. The sky lightened, but only barely, just enough to show the trees as silhouettes, the snow as a dull smear beneath their feet. Time here had begun to feel less like movement and more like weather, shifting, but without direction. Kratos stood first, not because it was time to move, but because stillness had grown unfamiliar again. The night had left something inside him. Not pain, not fear, but a sense of being remembered by something he had long chosen not to name. Atreus packed in silence, more thoughtful than tired. He moved slowly, carefully, eyes occasionally flicking toward his father as if trying to match the rhythm of his breath. He hadn't spoken again of the mountain or the burning tree. He didn't need to. Some dreams don't leave. They settle. They take root. And this one had lodged itself somewhere deep. Not like a memory, but like a seed. They walked east, toward no place in particular. The map they followed now was intuition, dream fragments, and the faint pull of something Atrus called possibility. He didn't name it aloud anymore. The road didn't want to hear its own prophecy spoken. It twisted too easily when watched. As they moved, the trees around them changed. Less frost, more rot. The bark here was soft, peeling. The roots too wide, as though the forest had begun to swell from within. And on more than one tree they saw symbols, not runes, not glyphs. Carvings, crude, handsome, violent, figures locked in war, spears through gods, giants burning in unnatural flame, old Greek motifs hidden in Norse woods. It made no sense, and that was the point. Someone's remembering, Atrus said quietly, pausing before one tree that bore a familiar shape. A bearded man with blades on his forearms, kneeling before a broken throne. Kratos stared at it. Long. Not me, he said. No, Atrus agreed, but something that remembers you. He stepped away before Kratos could reply. The moment didn't need words. They passed 5 more trees before the next break in the forest. Each one bore a different version of the same story. Fragmented, inverted, exaggerated. A woman with wings and fire in her hands. A child with glowing eyes climbing a mountain of corpses. A god split in 2, each half killing the other at the same time. Myths, not truths, but powerful enough that they had begun to root in the bark like fungus. Not growing from nature, feeding on it. These aren't Jotner visions, Atrus whispered. This isn't prophecy. Kratos said nothing, because he agreed. This was infection, not of body, but of belief. The world was beginning to imagine him again, not as he was, but as he had been. And that imagining had weight. They stopped by a stream that hadn't yet frozen. The water moved dark and fast beneath a web of dead branches. Kratos knelt, washed his face. Cold, sharp, grounding. But when he looked into the surface, the reflection wasn't alone. Not monstrous, not divine, just multiplied. A dozen faces hovering behind his. All versions of him. All watching. None speaking. He stood quickly. The image broke. Atrus looked over. You saw them too? Kratos nodded. Are they ghosts? No. Then what are they? Kratos looked toward the path ahead. Mist curling low, trees stretching into quiet. Old names, he said, still waiting to be called. And then he walked on, and the forest followed. Chapter 6, The Path to Jotunheim. It wasn't stronger, it wasn't colder, but it came from a direction that hadn't existed the day before. A wind that brought with it the smell of stone long buried, the hint of fire that hadn't burned in centuries, and something fainter still, like a voice caught in the throat of the mountain. Atrus felt it first, not with his skin, but with something deeper. It wasn't instinct, it was invitation. And as they crossed into the northern ridge, he didn't wait for his father to lead. He simply walked ahead. Kratos followed, not out of trust, not out of doubt, but because it was what he had always done, walked behind what mattered most. But this time the distance between them grew without effort, not by steps, not by silence, but by direction. Atrus no longer checked to see if his father was behind him. He didn't slow, didn't pause, as though something within him had remembered a road older than his memory. The mountains had changed too. The trees thinned into tall, leafless pines. Their branches reached upward like fingers not asking for help, but remembering the shape of sky. The ground beneath was layered in thick gray moss, not soft but spongy, like walking across old wounds. And everywhere the land began to lean, not just in slope, but in intent, as though the realm itself was guiding them. as though the land knew what came next. They passed a stone bridge half collapsed into a frozen gorge, where the ice below glowed faintly with embedded veins of something gold and slow-moving. Not lava, not light, something between. Atreus didn't hesitate. He leapt the gap with ease, landing without looking back. Kratos made the crossing silently, but noted the way the ice had cracked deeper under his step. The world was starting to speak to them in signs again. Not runes, not prophecy. Shifts, cracks, directions chosen by something unspoken. Ahead, the cliffs opened into a narrow path carved by ancient hands. Not dwarven, not mortal, Jotner. The scale was too large, the marks too graceful. Not built for defense, but for welcome, or warning, and every stone bore faded signs. Circles within circles, spirals with no center. Atreus brushed them lightly as he passed, as if they hummed only for him. Kratos kept his distance. He did not trust stones that remembered. They stopped at a flat ridge overlooking a wide, empty basin. In the center of the hollow stood what might once have been a gate. Massive pillars twisted inward toward an invisible center, cracked and overgrown with thorn vine. It bore no name, no runes, but it felt like a door, one that didn't open outward but inward into something far beneath sight or understanding. Atreus stepped closer to the edge. His shoulders rose slightly. His breath came faster, not in fear, in recognition. "I've seen this," he said, "in my sleep, not as it is but as it was, whole, shining." Kratos approached slowly. "What is it?" Atreus shook his head. "I don't know, but it's for me, not because of who I am now, but because of what I was, what they were." Kratos felt it too, that strange, unwelcome echo in the chest, the feeling of standing at the end of something that hadn't yet begun. And in that feeling was a name he didn't want to speak. Jotunheim, not the one they had seen before, not the peak where ashes had flown, but another part, older, lower, hidden, perhaps even from the giants themselves. The wind pulled again, and this time Kratos did not take the next step. Atreus stood at the edge of the basin for a long time, his silhouette motionless against the quiet curve of the earth. He wasn't gazing at the pillars. He was listening, his head tilted slightly, lips parted, not in speech but in reception. The way a person listens to a melody they almost remember. And though Kratos said nothing, he felt it. The pull wasn't just outward anymore. It had turned inward. Whatever called Atreus was no longer reaching from the distance. It had already arrived. Kratos moved closer, slowly, not to stop him, not yet, but to place himself within reach of the moment. The snow around them had changed, not in depth or cold, but in texture. It was smoother here, untouched by animal or storm, as if this place existed slightly apart from the world that contained it. Even the wind, once so curious, had stilled again, not withdrawn but waiting. "There's a word," Atreus said finally, "or the shape of one. It's not spoken, not even thought. It's given." Kratos frowned. "By whom?" Atreus turned his head slightly, but not to meet his father's eyes. "I don't know. It doesn't speak like gods, not even like the Jotner. Feels older than language, like memory before memory." He stepped forward again. The earth didn't crunch beneath his boots. It gave, just slightly, like something beneath was moving, or breathing, or shifting to accommodate his presence. His hands brushed the air between the broken pillars, as though some barrier still lingered, invisible but firm. His fingers met resistance. Not stone, not magic, but pressure, like touching the skin of water just before it breaks. And in that moment the wind returned, not loud, not violent. but deep. It rolled up from the basin floor like an exhale from a buried lung. And in it, a sound low, resonant, in no tongue Kratos recognized. But Atreus flinched. "I know that voice," he said, barely above a whisper. "It was in the tree, in the runes, in my dream." Kratos took one step forward. "What does it say?" Atreus closed his eyes, his brow furrowed, not in fear, but in strain. He was trying to hold something vast, and it was slipping. "It doesn't say anything," he said. "It reminds." Kratos felt the weight of that, the danger in it. A memory not your own can feel like prophecy, can become prophecy, especially for those born of many stories. "This gate," Kratos said, "it is not open." "No," Atreus said, "not yet, but it's listening." He placed his hand flat against the invisible surface between the pillars. No light flared, no thunder answered, just a single vibration, a thrum in the wrist, in the spine, in the air. Not a challenge, not a warning, recognition. Atreus breathed deep, and for a moment, Kratos saw something shift in his son's face. Not change, not corruption, but reaching, like the boy was stretching toward something that wasn't quite future or past, but something the present could not contain. And in that reaching, Kratos felt his own grip loosen. He remembered holding Atreus for the first time, small, frail, mortal. He remembered swearing silently to be what he had never been given, to protect, to shape. But now, protection had no place here. This was not a path he could walk. This was not a wall he could shield his son from. This was legacy answering itself. He clenched his fists, not in anger, but in helplessness, the most unfamiliar rage of all. And he took one step back. The wind moved once more, this time not as a breath, but as a veil being lifted. The air around the gate shimmered, faint as moonlight on still water, and the pillars seemed to stand straighter, more awake. They hadn't changed, not truly, but perception had. What once looked ruined now felt waiting. And in the center, just beyond the reach of Kratos' sight, something pulsed. Not light, not sound, but presence. And it pulsed in rhythm with Atreus' breath. The boy, no, the being before him, had grown still again, hand against the air, eyes half closed. His posture was not tense, not uncertain. He looked like someone being spoken through, like a flute held in the wind. Kratos did not move. He had faced gods, titans, monsters. He had broken worlds beneath his hands. But none of that weight compared to what he carried now, watching his son drift gently beyond the reach of protection. Not in defiance, not in rebellion, in becoming. Atreus turned slightly, his face unreadable in the pale light. "It's not just a place," he said. "It's a voice." Story still telling itself. Kratos frowned. "What does it want?" Atreus looked toward the gate. His answer came slow, thoughtful, honest. "Not me, not really. It wants the part of me that remembers." Kratos took a breath, let it settle in his chest. He understood that far too well. The past does not ask permission to follow you. It simply waits for silence. And yet, beneath the quiet, he could feel the separation. A strand of thread between them stretched taut. Not cut, not yet, but strained. "You are not alone," Kratos said. "I know," Atreus answered, but he did not look back. The cold deepened, not in temperature, but in clarity. That rare kind of cold that does not bite, but sharpens. The kind that draws edges around everything and makes you see what is actually there. And what was there now was this: a gate not yet opened, a son already halfway through it, and a father standing in a world no longer shaped for his hands. Kratos stepped forward, slowly, not to interfere, not to lead, just to stand beside him. But the moment he did, the shimmer at the gate flickered, just slightly, as if uncertain how to hold both of them. Atreus noticed. His voice was soft. It doesn't refuse you, but it doesn't recognize you either. Kratos stared at the threshold. Then I do not belong. You do, Atreus said, and then after a breath, just not here. That was the wound, the one with no blood. They stood in silence, father and son, divided not by conflict, but by calling. Behind them, the forest had vanished in mist. Before them, the gate held its breath. And slowly Kratos turned, not away, but aside. He would not follow, not now, because to follow would be to interfere, and to interfere would be to lose him. He set his feet in the snow. Go, he said. Atreus looked at him, truly looked, for the first time in the span of the morning. And he nodded. No ritual, no farewell, just footsteps, one into the mist, one remaining in place, and the gate, ancient, unspeaking, listened. Chapter 7, Trial of the Fathers. The forest had changed without changing. The trees still stood in solemn rows, tall and watching, branches stitched with frost, their silence deep as ever. But Kratos felt the shift in his bones, the kind that has nothing to do with place and everything to do with absence, the kind of silence that comes only after someone has left and taken something vital with them. He walked without destination, but not without purpose. His body moved as it always had, heavy, certain, measured. But his mind was no longer following him. It trailed behind, wrapped around the sound of footsteps not beside him. The wind was low, brushing across the snow like a breath drawn and never exhaled. He followed no road, only instinct. The world no longer offered signs, no markers, no runes to guide him. Even the trees had stopped whispering, as if the very land knew. This path was not myth. This was not destiny. This was morning. He came upon a clearing near midday. A ring of stones sat half buried in ice, an old fire circle, long extinguished. No smoke, no memory, just the outline of where warmth once was. Kratos sat beside it, slowly, lowering himself with the deliberate care of someone who does not wish to disturb something sleeping. He did not light a flame. He did not speak. The quiet pressed in, thick and knowing. Time passed, or it didn't. Then a sound, soft, familiar, cruel. You always did sit like that when you didn't have the words. Kratos did not move. He knew the voice came not from the trees, nor from within. It came from a place just past remembering. He looked up. She stood across the stones. They, not as a ghost, not as a memory, as a presence, not solid, not fully, but present enough to feel the cold shift away from her. She wore the cloak she had died in, but there was no wound, no blood. Her face was calm, not smiling, but alive with something beyond judgment. Kratos did not reach for her. He simply looked. I don't have dreams like Atreus, he said. I know, she replied. You bury yours. He looked down again at the unlit circle. He has gone where I cannot follow. Faye stepped lightly, snow not touching her feet. Isn't that what you wanted? For him to find his own way? Yes, Kratos said, but I did not know how quiet it would be. Faye knelt across from him, her eyes steady, her voice softer now. You were not made for quiet. Kratos let the truth of that settle. It stung, not like a wound, like a truth accepted too late. I fought to give him peace, he said, not prophecy. And he has both now, Faye said, but neither came from fighting. A pause. Then, he carries you, even now. Kratos looked up. "And I cannot carry him." "No," she said, "you cannot. That was never your burden." He stared at her. "Then what is?" Faye tilted her head, as though listening to something he could not hear. Her next words were not hers. They came from the shape of the world. "To let him leave your shadow without losing your love." The silence that followed was deep, but kind. Kratos bowed his head, not in defeat, in understanding. The snow had begun to fall again, soft, dry, soundless. It dusted Kratos' shoulders, caught in his beard, settled on the stones between him and the ghost of the woman he loved. Faye sat with the stillness of someone who had no more to prove, no battles to return from, no armor left to wear. She did not reach for him. She did not offer comfort. She simply stayed and let the silence stretch until it became permission. "I taught him how to fight," Kratos said, his voice low, heavy. "How to survive. How to kill if he must. And how to choose not to," Faye replied gently. Kratos looked away. "I taught him how to be strong." "You taught him how to be alone," she said. The words were not unkind, but they cut deeper than any blade he had ever known. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. He stared at the fire pit between them, at the place where a flame should have been. "I don't know what he will become," he said. "You never did," Faye replied. "You only feared it would be you." Kratos' jaw clenched, not in anger but restraint. His silence now was not the silence of stubbornness. It was the silence of someone standing at the edge of a truth so large, it could not be spoken without breaking. "I have only ever known one way," he said. "I know," Faye said. "And still, you walked away from it." He looked up. There was no accusation in her gaze, only memory. "You put down your blades," she said, "not because you had peace, but because you wanted him to have a chance at it." Kratos said nothing. "You were never meant to be a father," she continued. "Not by blood, not by design, but you became one." "How?" he asked. Faye smiled then, not wide but warm. The smile she used to give when Atreus asked questions he didn't yet understand. The smile that said, "You already know, even if you don't see it yet." "By staying," she said. A long silence followed. The snow kept falling. "I do not know how to help him now," Kratos said finally. "He walks in places I cannot follow." "Then don't follow," Faye said. "Stand where he can return." He let that settle. It filled his chest, then his arms, then his throat. Not as warmth, not yet, but as space. The kind he had never allowed himself. "For so long," he said, "I believed I had to shape him into something the world would not break." "You did," she said, "but the world cannot break him the way it broke you." He met her eyes. "How do you know?" "Because he is still looking forward." Kratos did not cry. The tears lived somewhere deep, but did not rise. His grief was not fluid, it was weight, and in this moment it was being set down stone by stone. Faye stood, the snow falling through her now. "I have to go," she said. "Are you real?" he asked. "Or only what I wanted to hear?" She looked at him one last time and said, "Does it matter?" Then she was gone. No burst of light, no swirl of leaves, just absence. And Kratos sat alone once more. But something in him had shifted. Not broken, not healed, unclenched. The fire pit remained cold. Kratos made no move to light it. He sat still long after the vision had faded, long after Faye's voice had stopped echoing in his chest. The clearing around him seemed smaller now, not for lack of space, but because there was nothing left to fill it. No argument, no prophecy, just snow and stone and the weight of staying. He had once believed strength was measured in what could be broken. Now he understood true strength was measured in what could be held, without closing your hand around it, in what you let walk away from you, and trusted would return or not. His hands rested on his knees. His axe lay at his side, untouched. The leather bindings were worn through in places. He had once wrapped them with the same precision he'd used to bind wounds. But now he left them undone. A weapon didn't need to be perfect if it wasn't always the answer. The trees around him stood still, watching but not judging. They had seen gods kneel and suns grow and snow bury the bones of old ways. And now they bore witness to this. A man not marching, not retreating, but waiting. He didn't pray. Kratos did not believe in prayer. But he hoped, quietly, not with words, with presence. A raven passed overhead. Not black, but gray-feathered and old. It didn't caw, just glided once through the thinning sky and vanished into the mist. A sign? A watcher? Perhaps. But Kratos didn't rise. He no longer read messages into every omen. The world would speak when it needed to. Until then, he would listen. And in listening, he would remain. Because that was the trial now. Not to fight, not to teach, not even to protect. But to trust that what he had done, who he had been, was enough to give Atreus the chance to become something more. And that, whatever came next, he would not meet it with rage, but with readiness. A soft wind stirred through the pines. Somewhere far off, water moved. A thawed stream, a turning current. Something beginning again. Kratos stood. He did not look toward the past. He looked at the horizon. And he waited, not as a god, not even as a warrior, but as a father who no longer needed to lead in order to love. Chapter 8: The Face Beneath the Mask. The cave was not marked. No runes above the threshold. No warnings carved into stone. No trail leading toward it. It did not invite. It waited. A low break in the mountainside, half covered by bramble and mist, like a mouth trying not to speak. Atreus found it without meaning to, or perhaps he'd been following something all along. Not direction, but instinct. That subtle pull he'd come to recognize as the blood of the Jotnar calling from beneath the world's surface, like roots murmuring to themselves in the dark. He paused outside the entrance. The fog rolled low around his feet, curling into the cave like it belonged there. He didn't ask why. He didn't call for his father. He simply placed his palm against the stone and stepped inside. It wasn't dark. Not fully. The walls glowed faintly with lightless color, hues that shimmered without source, bleeding across the surface like reflections in a mirror turned backward. The passage narrowed as he walked, each step softer than the last, not in sound, in weight, as if gravity, meaning, even consequence grew thinner the deeper he went. Symbols followed him, carvings on the walls but unfinished, half-runes, echoes, shapes that looked like letters only when viewed out of the corner of the eye. He tried to read them, but they shifted too quickly, not to hide from him, to hide themselves, language unraveling before it could speak. Eventually, the tunnel opened into a chamber, round, wide, domed like the inside of a skull, and at the center stood a pedestal. Upon it, a mask, not ornate, not gilded, simple, ancient, wood smoothed by time, hollow-eyed, with a crack running from the brow to the jaw. It bore no expression, not of wrath or wisdom or divinity, only absence, the kind of blankness that comes not from ignorance, but from erasure. Atreus stepped closer. Each footfall echoed, though the room had no corners. He circled the mask once, twice, then stopped. He knew it. He did not know how, but he knew it, not from stories, not from the words of Mimir or the visions of the giants. From within, the crack down the face, it matched the one from his dreams. The silence it radiated, It matched the one in his chest. He reached out, fingertips trembling not from fear, but from something deeper, recognition. And the moment he touched it, the world inverted. There was no flash, no burst of vision, no collapse of space or scream of truth. The change was quieter than that, slower, like breath leaving a room. The chamber remained, the pedestal too, but the air around him had thickened, bent inward, as though he now stood beneath something he could not see. Or worse, inside something that had already closed behind him. The mask in his hand felt heavier now, warmer, not alive but not inert either, as if it were remembering its purpose through his touch. He blinked, and the room flickered, not with light, with versioning. For a moment the walls held murals, then only stone, then both, layers folding over one another like pages half-burned but never turned. He saw himself, not directly, in outlines, in echoes, a younger version, not child, not God question, standing before the mask, putting it on, and becoming something else. He took a step back. The image rippled and split. Now he stood atop a mountain, the mask in his hand, not looking through it, but at it, holding it up toward a sky that bent away from him. Runes swirled around his feet, forming languages that had no alphabet, only intention. Around him the bodies of gods, not slain but undone, not corpses, absences. Then again a flicker. Now he stood alone in a hall with no walls, stars overhead, earth far below. The mask was fused to his face. He was speaking, no commanding, not armies, not monsters, possibility itself. And all around him were shapes, not beings, not enemies, choices given form. He staggered back from the pedestal, eyes wide. The chamber returned, cold, silent. The mask in his hands unchanged, but something inside him had shifted. It wasn't a vision of what would be. It was a question of what could be. And in that question, he felt the edge of something that did not belong to any god, any prophecy, any story told by fireside or ruin. Power without tether, voice without shape, and it wore his face. Atreus breathed out, slowly. The mask looked at him. No expression, just the crack. Deep, quiet, permanent. He had not been shown a destiny. He had been shown an option. A path with no gods above, no giants beneath. No war, no father, no son. Only him, and the silence that would follow if he said yes. Atreus stood still for a long time, the mask resting in his hands like a sleeping question. The silence in the chamber was thick, but not threatening. No voice tempted him. No vision pressed itself into his mind. The danger here wasn't in being taken. It was in agreeing, in saying yes to something that had no voice, no face, only possibility sharpened into temptation. He looked at the mask's eyes, hollow, featureless, dark. He imagined putting it on, not with fear, with clarity. He imagined what he'd become, how easily the world would bend if he stopped asking what it needed and started deciding instead. How quickly the pain would end, his, others. He could see every path clearly now, not in detail, but in structure. The branching of outcomes, the shapes of futures curling outward like roots in black soil. And in the center of them all, a single truth. He could become something that answers everything. But something stopped him. Not a warning, not even a memory, a feeling, a campfire, a silence shared, a voice, gravel rough and unsure, saying not "I love you," but "stay close." A hand on his shoulder before a storm, a wordless nod before a battle. His father not looming, not commanding, present, always behind, never pulling. That had been enough. And that was the choice. Not light or dark, Not God or man, but this. Would he become the one who decides everything, or the one who keeps listening? He let out a breath, and gently, without fear, he placed the mask back on the pedestal. The chamber did not react. No wind, no collapse, no judgment, only quiet. And in that quiet, Atrus smiled faintly, because the mask had offered him a face. But he had one already. He turned, walked away. The walls did not close behind him. The tunnel remained open, waiting for the next question, the next hand, the next hunger. But it would not be him. Outside, the sky had cleared. The snow was soft again. The cold was real. He stepped out beneath a pale blue horizon, one not written by gods or myths or masks. And as he walked into the light, Atrus felt something deep within him settle, not because he had no power, but because he had chosen not to use it. Chapter 9: The God Who Would Not Rule. The path home was not marked by stone or memory. It wound through woods that no longer whispered, past streams that carried no omens, under skies that had stopped watching. Atrus walked it alone, but he did not feel lost. The silence around him was not emptiness. It was peace, earned not through conquest, not through clarity, but through a choice no one would see, no one would praise. A choice that would never be carved into the walls of a temple. He had walked to the edge of becoming and turned back. The birds returned before he reached the ridge. Small ones, quiet, flickering through the branches like thoughts too soft to speak aloud. The wind carried no riddles now, just air, cold and clean. He passed through a grove where the trees had once spoken in dreams, now still, now satisfied. He felt their awareness shift slightly as he moved through, like a shared breath exhaled. Not in recognition, in acceptance. He thought of the mask only once, not as power, not as temptation, but as a mirror. And he was no longer afraid of the reflection. By midday, he reached the tree line that overlooked the northern valley. The world opened below him. No gates, no giants, no stars unraveling in his blood. Just forests, hills, the curve of a mountain that did not carry memory, the edge of a home not built yet. And in that vastness a figure stood. Kratos, still, waiting, not watching the horizon, not reaching out, holding the place. Atrus descended slowly, his feet careful on the slope. No words prepared, no revelation in hand, only the steps of someone who had gone far and chosen to come back. Kratos heard him before he saw him, the crunch of snow behind him, the breath. He did not turn. Atrus stepped up beside him and stood in silence. The stillness stretched, not tense, sacred. Finally, "You returned," Kratos said. "I chose to," Atrus replied. Kratos looked at him then, truly looked. His son's eyes were calm. No fire, no weight, just truth. "What did you find?" he asked. Atrus thought for a moment. Then, "A face I could have worn." Kratos said nothing, but in his silence, something released, like a bowstring finally unstrung. "And," he asked. "I didn't want to rule," Atrus said. "I just wanted to understand." Kratos gave a slow nod. "Did you?" Atrus smiled. A quiet, tired, real smile. "Enough." They stood there for a time, letting the moment stretch between them like a bridge rebuilt without words. There was no rush now, no approaching storm, no prophecy demanding their shape. Just wind and snow and the slow realization that neither of them knew what came next. And that was good. That was free. "I thought I would lose you," Kratos said at last. The words came with difficulty, not because they were heavy, but because they were true. "To the power, to the blood." Atrus nodded. "So did I. But you came back." I didn't want to, he admitted. Not at first. There was a part of me that wanted to keep going. That thought, if I just walked far enough, I wouldn't have to be anyone. Just possibility. Kratos didn't flinch. He understood that part too well. And, he asked, I realized possibility without people is just emptiness, Atreus said. And I don't want to be powerful if it means being alone. Kratos looked at him for a long time. You are not alone, he said. Atreus met his father's eyes. The first time in days he'd looked into them, not just at them. I know that now, he said, but I needed to find it for myself. A silence followed, not out of tension, but reverence. Then Kratos, slowly, lowered himself to sit on a flat stone. Atreus joined him, knees drawn, cloak pulled tight. They looked out over the trees together. The mountains, the clouds, the far peaks where gods once stood and fell. There is no crown for what you did, Kratos said. I don't want one. No title. No monument. I don't need one. Then what do you want? Atreus thought about that. The question was simple, but he had never answered it before without someone else's voice in his ear. Not the Jotnar, not Mimir, not even his father. He turned to the horizon and said, Time, to learn, to walk, to help maybe. I don't want to lead anyone. I just want to be someone worth following. Kratos nodded once, not in approval, but in recognition. That, he said, is more than I ever knew how to ask for. And in that moment, the last breath of war between them, not battle, but the war of becoming, left the air. They sat a while longer. No more lessons. No more warnings. Just a father and a son who had finally let each other become. The sun began to lower behind the mountains, casting long gold across the frost-covered pines. Light slipped between the trees like it was remembering how to be soft. Atreus stood first. He didn't announce it, didn't name it as farewell. It simply was, the natural next breath after silence. Kratos looked up at him and for a moment, just a moment, saw him not as a boy, not as a burden, not even as a son. He saw him as a man, and with that recognition came something even rarer. Peace. You'll go, Kratos asked, though he already knew. Atreus nodded. Not far. Not forever. Where? I don't know yet. There's still more to learn. More to understand. I don't want to be what they expected. I want to find what was lost. Not just Jotnar. Stories. People. Balance. Kratos stood, slow and deliberate. The snow crunched beneath his boots. He looked down at the boy he had carried, protected, feared for, and realized he did not need to hold him back to hold him close. Atreus reached into his satchel and pulled out a small piece of cloth, folded tightly. He placed it in Kratos' hand without ceremony. Inside, a smooth stone, etched faintly with an unfamiliar symbol, not Norse, not Greek. Something older, something new, a name not spoken yet, but waiting. Kratos turned it in his palm. What is it? He asked. I don't know, Atreus said, but it was at the center of the mask chamber. It didn't ask to be found. It just was, and it didn't feel like danger. It felt like beginning. Kratos closed his fingers around the stone. Yours. Atreus smiled softly. Ours. If ever the path grows unclear again. A long pause passed between them. No rush. No urgency. The moment would last as long as it needed to. Then Kratos said, not as command, not as instruction, but as blessing, walk your road. And Atreus replied, not as son, not as student, but as self, and you keep it lit. Their eyes met. Not goodbye, not the end. The space between stories. Atreus turned and walked into the trees, cloak trailing behind him like shadow. The wind moved gently around his shoulders. The woods did not resist his steps. They opened, and Kratos stood watching, just long enough to feel the snow settle in his beard again. Then he turned. Not back. Forward. Chapter 10 echoes in the quiet. The cabin stood as it always had. The roof sagged slightly from the weight of long winters. The door leaned inward on a softened hinge, and the walls bore the faint scars of time, gods, and survival. But it stood. It had been a place of shelter, of battle, of silence. It had been a home, and now it was simply there, waiting, not for a hero, not for a war, just for someone to come back. Kratos stepped through the threshold without hesitation. No weapon drawn, no words spoken. He set the axe by the door, not in readiness, in reverence. The hearth was cold, but the embers hadn't fully died. He didn't rush to relight them. He simply sat. The bench creaked beneath his weight, not in protest but in familiarity, as if the wood remembered him. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. Not a whisper, not a warning, just sound. The kind of sound that doesn't fill the silence, but reminds you it's alive. Kratos looked around the room. The shelf where Atreus had once placed wildflowers, long wilted. The cloak Faye had sewn, still folded by the hearth. The marks on the wall where a bowstring had snapped and left its bite. None of it had changed. None of it had waited. It had simply endured. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands folded. For the first time in a long time, he did not brace for what might come. He did not listen for footsteps behind him. He did not expect prophecy to press itself against the window. He just breathed. It was not an easy breath, but it was his. And in that breath, he heard something more profound than thunder or fate. Stillness. The kind that did not demand. The kind that did not break. He had not come back to reclaim the past. He had come to live in what followed it. A single log shifted in the hearth. The ember beneath it flared, faint but true. Kratos rose, knelt, and fed it a scrap of wood. Not for warmth, not for ritual, but because some flames are not meant to die in the dark. The days passed without ceremony. No bells marked their turning. No ravens came bearing riddles. The sky shifted from gray to silver to black and back again, and Kratos marked time not by hours, but by the shape of the light across the cabin floor. The world no longer called for his hand, and so he let it rest. The axe remained by the door, untouched, not abandoned, not buried, present, like memory. He repaired what needed mending, not with urgency but care. A loose plank, a broken hinge. The tools felt strange at first, light, but soon his hands remembered. It was the same strength, just redirected. The same focus without blood. Sometimes he spoke aloud, not to anyone, just to the space. Small things, names of herbs, measurements for stew, a half-remembered line from something Atreus had once said in jest. The silence responded not with voice, but with warmth, the kind that fills a room when it's finally been lived in again. He hunted, but less. The forest offered what was needed and no more. The wolves no longer scattered at his approach. Once, he stood still long enough for a fox to pass within arm's reach. It glanced up at him, curious but unafraid, and then was gone. That too felt like something sacred. Sometimes he thought of Olympus, not with rage, not with shame, but with the softness of old scars. He no longer saw the faces of the gods he had slain. He saw only his own hands, what they had held, what they had released. He did not miss war, but he did not forget it. Some nights, he would wake before dawn and sit outside as the mist rose through the trees. He'd listen to the world breathing low, slow, alive. He would close his eyes and hear the echoes not of voices, but of choices. Faye, Daimas, Mimir's laughter, the fire crackling in a cave deep in Midgard, Atrus's first lie, his first kill, his first forgiveness. None of it vanished. All of it still here. Sometimes presence is not what returns. It is what remains. And slowly he began to understand. He was not waiting for anything. Not for Atrus. Not for conflict. Not for death. He was simply here. And that was enough. Spring came slowly, as if unsure it was welcome. The snow thinned, retreated in patches, exposing earth the color of old copper. Buds appeared on the trees like small questions. The air softened. Light began to stretch longer across the floorboards, brushing Kratos's boots before he rose. He noticed these things, not as omens, as gifts. One morning, while sharpening a small blade not meant for war but for wood, he paused. Something had shifted, not outside, inside. The feeling was not dramatic, no thunder, no calling voice, just ease. The weight he'd carried all his life, of guilt, of vengeance, of fatherhood shaped by fear. It was still there, but lighter. Not because it had vanished, because he had stopped dragging it forward. He set the blade down, stood, looked around the cabin, and then, without ceremony, he stepped outside. Not to hunt, not to patrol, not to search for meaning, just to walk. He followed no trail, let his feet choose. The forest greeted him like it knew his name but no longer needed to speak it. Trees swayed gently. The wind moved like breath, not burden. Somewhere in the distance, water flowed, not rushing, not raging, just moving. He reached a ridge he hadn't visited since before the journey began. The view was wide, green now, soft hills rolling toward a sky that no longer looked down, but opened up. He sat, no armor, no cloak, just himself. And then he smiled. It was small, crooked, faint, but it was real. He had not become a god again. He had not become a ghost. He had simply become quiet. The world didn't need him now, and for the first time he did not need the world to. Below, a deer passed through the clearing. A bird lifted into the sky. Time moved. Kratos remained. And somewhere, in the place where gods once rose and fell, a story ended without a sword, and began again, with stillness. He did not become a god again. He did not become a ghost. He simply became quiet. No throne, no prophecy, no victory carved in stone. Just a man who chose to remain.